The morning mist hung heavy over London as William stood at the tall windows of Kensington Palace, watching the first light of dawn break through the gray clouds. His reflection stared back at him, but he barely recognized the man looking back. The weight of recent events had carved new lines around his eyes, and his usual confident posture had given way to something more fragile, more human. Kate found him there, as she had every morning for the past week. She moved silently across the room, her bare feet making no sound on the cold marble floor. Without a word, she slipped her hand into his, and together they watched the world wake up to another day of uncertainty and sorrow. "The flowers," Kate whispered, her voice barely audible. "There are so many flowers." William followed her gaze to the palace gates, where thousands of bouquets, cards, and tributes had been left by people from all walks of life. The colorful display created a stark contrast against the somber mood that had settled over the entire nation. Each flower represented a story, a life touched by the tragedy that had shaken everyone to their core. The phone calls had started before sunrise. Prime Minister, foreign dignitaries, family members, all wanted to know what would happen next, how the royal family would respond, what message would be sent to a grieving nation. But William had no answers. For the first time in his life, the carefully structured world he had grown up in felt completely unpredictable. Kate squeezed his hand gently. "We need to get ready," she said softly. "The children will be waking soon, and they'll have questions." The thought of facing George, Charlotte, and Louis made William's chest tighten. How do you explain to children that sometimes terrible things happen for no reason? How do you maintain their sense of safety and wonder when your own faith in the world has been shaken? They moved through their morning routine like actors in a play they had never rehearsed. Kate helped William with his tie, her fingers working automatically while her mind wandered to all the families across the country who were going through their own morning routines, forever changed by recent events. She thought about the mothers who would never again help their children get ready for school, the fathers who would never again kiss their families goodbye before work. The breakfast room felt unusually quiet. Even the children seemed to sense the gravity of the situation. George, now old enough to understand that something serious was happening, ate his cereal in silence while glancing nervously at his parents. Charlotte hummed softly to herself, a coping mechanism Kate recognized from her own childhood. Little Louis, blissfully unaware of the world's complexities, chattered happily about his toy cars. "Mummy," Charlotte said suddenly, looking up from her toast, "why are there so many people outside with flowers?" Kate and William exchanged glances. They had prepared for this question, but hearing it from their daughter's innocent voice made it feel fresh and painful. Sometimes, Kate began carefully, sitting down next to Charlotte. When something very sad happens, people want to show that they care. The flowers are their way of saying that they're thinking about everyone who is hurting. "Are we hurting?" George asked, his mature voice carrying a weight that seemed too heavy for his young shoulders. William knelt beside his eldest son's chair. "Yes," he said simply, "we are. And it's okay to feel sad when sad things happen. What matters is how we help each other feel better." The rest of breakfast passed in contemplative silence, each family member lost in their own thoughts, yet connected by the invisible threads of love and shared concern that bound them together. After the children had been taken to their lessons by their tutors, William and Kate retreated to their private study. The room felt like a sanctuary filled with personal photographs, books they had read together, and small mementos from their travels around the Commonwealth. Here, surrounded by reminders of happier times, they could allow themselves to process the magnitude of what lay ahead. Kate settled into the window seat, pulling a soft throw around her shoulders. The gesture reminded William of their early days together, when she would curl up in this same spot while he studied for exams. Those days seemed like a lifetime ago, when their biggest worries were university assignments and whether they would have enough time together between his royal duties and her family commitments. "I keep thinking about the last time we visited," Kate said, her voice distant. "Remember how excited everyone was?" The children who gathered around Charlotte, the elderly man who told you about his service in the war, the young mother who asked if she could take a photograph with me. William remembered. Public visits had always been one of his favorite aspects of royal duty. Meeting people, hearing their stories, being reminded that behind every face in a crowd was a complete human life filled with hopes, dreams, struggles, and triumphs. Now, many of those same faces would never smile again. The tragedy had struck without warning. A senseless act that had torn through a community like a tornado, leaving destruction and heartbreak in its wake. The details were still being investigated, but the impact was already immeasurable. Families destroyed, futures erased, a community left to pick up pieces that could never fully be put back together. "What do we do?" William asked, voicing the question that had been haunting him since the news first broke. "How do we help them heal when we can barely understand what happened ourselves?" Kate turned from the window, her eyes reflecting the same uncertainty and determination that he felt. "We show up," she said with quiet conviction. "We listen. We let them know they're not alone in their grief." The decision to visit the affected community had not been an easy one. Security concerns, the raw emotions of the survivors, the intense media attention. All of these factors made the visit complicated and potentially risky. But both William and Kate knew that sometimes royal duty meant stepping into uncomfortable spaces, being present when presence was needed most. Their private secretary knocked gently on the door, carrying a folder thick with briefing materials, security protocols, and speech drafts. The machinery of royal responsibility was already in motion, preparing for their public response to private tragedy. "Your Royal Highnesses," he began formally, then paused, his professional demeanor softening slightly. "I've been in contact with local authorities and community leaders. They've requested that you visit as soon as possible. The people are asking for you." William nodded, understanding the weight of that statement. In times of crisis, people often look to institutions and figures that represented continuity and stability. The royal family had served this role for generations, offering comfort not through grand gestures, but through simple presence and acknowledgement of shared humanity. The briefing materials painted a picture of devastation that statistics could never fully capture. Lives lost, families shattered, survivors struggling with trauma that would last far beyond the immediate aftermath. But they also told stories of incredible bravery, of ordinary people who had become heroes in moments of crisis, of communities coming together to support each other in ways that restored faith in human goodness. Kate read through testimonials from witnesses, her heart breaking with each account. A teacher who had protected her students, a father who had helped others escape to safety, a young woman who had administered first aid despite being injured herself. These were the stories that needed to be told, the examples of courage and compassion that offered hope in the darkness. "There will be media," the private secretary continued, "but we've arranged for most of the visit to be private. The families have specifically requested time to speak with you away from cameras. They want to share their memories, their stories, without feeling like they're performing their grief for public consumption." This was exactly what William and Kate had hoped for. Public appearances were necessary, but the real work of comfort and healing happened in quiet conversations, in moments of shared silence, in the simple act of looking someone in the eyes and acknowledging their pain. The afternoon was spent in preparation, not just logistical, but emotional. How do you prepare to meet parents who have lost children? How do you find words of comfort when no words could possibly be adequate? How do you maintain composure when witnessing suffering that defies comprehension? Kate called her mother, seeking the kind of practical wisdom that only comes from experience. Carol Middleton had always been a source of strength and grounding for her daughter, and now more than ever, Kate needed that connection to the world beyond palace walls. "Just be yourself," her mother advised. "Don't try to have all the answers. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply acknowledge that there are no answers, that some things are beyond understanding. Let them know you see them, you hear them, and you care. William spoke with his father, King Charles, who had faced his own share of national tragedies during his time in public service. The king's advice was similar, but carried the additional weight of institutional memory and royal precedent. Remember, King Charles said, that our role is not to fix what cannot be fixed, but to witness what must be witnessed. The people need to know that their pain matters, that their loved ones will be remembered, that their community's strength in the face of tragedy is seen and honored. As evening approached, both William and Kate found themselves drawn back to their children. They helped with homework, listened to stories about the day's lessons, and tucked each child in a bed with extra attention and care. The contrast between their family's safety and the devastation others were experiencing was not lost on either of them. "Will you tell me a story, Mummy?" Charlotte asked as Kate smoothed the blankets around her daughter's small frame. Kate settled into the chair beside the bed and began to tell a tale about brave princesses and kind princes who helped their kingdoms through difficult times. But as she spoke, her mind wandered to the real stories they would encounter tomorrow, stories of ordinary people showing extraordinary courage in the face of unimaginable loss. That night, neither William nor Kate slept well. They lay side by side in the darkness, each lost in their own thoughts, but connected by their shared sense of purpose and responsibility. Tomorrow would be one of the most challenging days of their public life, but it would also be one of the most important. In homes across the affected community, other families were also lying awake, preparing in their own ways for the visit from the Prince and Princess of Wales. Some were nervous about meeting royalty in the midst of their grief. Others were angry, feeling that no amount of royal attention could undo what had been done. Most were simply hoping for a moment of human connection, for someone in a position of influence to acknowledge their pain and witness their strength. The flowers outside Kensington Palace continued to pile up throughout the night, brought by people who needed to do something, anything, to express their solidarity with the grieving community. Among the formal arrangements were handmade cards from children, personal letters from families who had experienced their own tragedies, and simple wildflowers picked from backyard gardens by people who wanted to contribute what little they could to the growing memorial. As dawn approached, William stood once again at the window, but this time Kate was already beside him. They watched the sun rise over their city, over their country, over a world that would be forever changed by recent events. But they also saw the early morning joggers beginning their routes, the shopkeepers opening their doors, the parents walking their children to school, all the ordinary moments that make up extraordinary human resilience. "Are you ready?" Kate asked, though she knew the answer. No one could ever truly be ready for what lay ahead. "No," William replied honestly. "But that's exactly why we need to go." They dressed carefully, choosing clothes that were respectful, but not overly formal, somber, but not dramatic. Every choice carried weight and meaning that would be analyzed and interpreted by media and public alike. But more importantly, every choice needed to respect the families they would meet and the gravity of their loss. The car was waiting outside, along with security personnel and staff members who would accompany them on this most difficult of royal duties. As they settled into the back seat for the journey that would take them into the heart of a community's grief, both William and Kate understood that they were not just representing the royal family or even the nation. They were representing the human capacity for compassion in the face of incomprehensible tragedy. The drive through London's morning traffic gave them time to review their notes one final time, but mostly they sat in contemplative silence, preparing themselves mentally and emotionally for what awaited them. This would be more than a royal visit. It would be a test of their ability to offer comfort without false hope, strength without dismissing vulnerability, and presence without intrusion. As their convoy approached the community that had become the center of national attention and sorrow, both William and Kate could see the crowds that had gathered. Not crowds of celebration or curiosity, but gatherings of people who needed to be together, to share their grief collectively, and to witness this moment of acknowledgement from their future king and queen. The flowers, cards, and tributes here dwarfed even the memorial that had grown outside Kensington Palace. The entire area had been transformed into a living testament to love, loss, and the human need to honor those who could no longer be honored in person. Their car slowed as they approached the first stop of their visit, and William and Kate prepared to step out into a world forever changed, ready to offer whatever comfort they could to a community that would never be the same. The car door opened, and suddenly, the weight of 1,000 eyes fell upon William and Kate as they stepped onto the pavement. The sounds hit them immediately. The soft murmur of hushed conversations, the gentle rustle of flowers being placed, the occasional sob that someone couldn't quite contain. The air itself seemed heavy with collective sorrow, thick with the kind of grief that settles deep into a community's bones and changes everything forever. Their first steps were tentative, respectful. This was not their tragedy to experience, but their privilege to witness. Local officials approached with careful deference, their usual protocol, training barely masking their own emotional exhaustion. These were people who had been working around the clock, coordinating responses, supporting families, trying to hold their community together while processing their own shock and loss. "Your Royal Highnesses," the local mayor began, his voice strained from days of public speaking and private tears. "Thank you for coming. The families, they wanted to meet you away from the main memorial first, somewhere quieter. Is that acceptable?" Kate nodded immediately. "Whatever they need," she said simply. "We're here for them, not for anyone else." They were led toward a small community center that had been transformed into a temporary sanctuary. The building, normally used for children's birthday parties and weekend craft classes, now served as a gathering place for people whose lives had been torn apart. The walls still displayed cheerful artwork from local school children, creating a heartbreaking contrast with the current circumstances. Inside, about 20 family members waited in a circle of chairs. Some sat alone, staring at their hands. Others clung to each other, finding strength in physical contact. A few stood by the windows, unable to sit still with their nervous energy and overwhelming emotions. The age range spanned from grandparents to young siblings, all united by the incomprehensible loss they shared. William and Kate entered slowly, making eye contact with each person, offering small nods of acknowledgement. They had been briefed on some of the families, but knowing the facts of someone's loss and meeting them in their grief were entirely different experiences. Here was Sarah, whose 8-year-old daughter Emma had been among the youngest victims. There was David, a father of 3 who had lost his wife and was now facing parenthood alone. In the corner sat Margaret, an elderly woman whose grandson had been just starting his adult life when it was cut short. "Please," Kate said softly, addressing the room, "don't feel like you need to stand or do anything formal. We're not here as royalty right now. We're here as people who care about you." The simple statement seemed to break through some of the tension in the room. A few people relaxed their shoulders. Someone let out a shaky breath. It was a small moment, but in a space filled with such enormous pain, small moments carried tremendous weight. William moved toward David, the widowed father, drawn by an instinct he couldn't quite explain. Perhaps it was the recognition of another man trying to hold himself together for his children's sake, or maybe it was simply the profound sadness in David's eyes that called out for acknowledgement. "I'm so sorry for your loss," William said, settling into the chair beside him. The words felt inadequate, but they were true, and they were offered with genuine feeling. David looked up, his eyes red-rimmed, but dry. He had cried so much over the past days that tears seemed temporarily exhausted. She was the heart of our family," he said quietly. "I don't know how to be the heart. She always knew what to do, what to say. I'm just trying to keep the kids from falling apart completely." "You don't have to be her," William replied gently. "You just have to be you. Your children need their father, not a replacement for their mother. They need your particular way of loving them." Meanwhile, Kate had gravitated towards Sarah, who sat holding a photograph of her daughter Emma. The little girl in the picture had bright eyes and a gap-toothed smile, frozen in a moment of pure childhood joy that would never age or dim. She loved to draw, Sarah said without prompting, as if speaking about Emma helped keep her daughter present in the room. Constantly. We had drawings covering every surface of the refrigerator, taped to her bedroom walls, stuffed into every available space. I used to complain that we were drowning in her artwork. Kate smiled softly. What did she like to draw most? Animals, especially horses. She was convinced that when she grew up, she was going to have a horse farm and rescue all the horses that needed homes. Sarah's voice broke slightly. She had it all planned out. Tell me more about her plan, Kate encouraged, understanding instinctively that talking about Emma's dreams was a way of honoring her life rather than just mourning her death. As conversations developed around the room, something remarkable began to happen. The initial awkwardness gave way to something more natural, more healing. People started sharing not just their grief, but their memories. Stories emerged of loved ones who had been passionate about music, devoted to their work, committed to helping others. The room filled with laughter mixed with tears as relatives recalled funny habits, repeated sayings, and cherished traditions. Margaret, the grandmother, beckoned William over to her corner by the window. She was holding a worn leather wallet, the kind that showed years of daily use. This was James's, she said, opening it to reveal a collection of cards and photographs. My grandson. He carried pictures of all of us everywhere he went. Look, she pointed to a faded school photo of herself from decades earlier. This is me when I was his teacher before I retired. He kept it even after he grew up, said it reminded him that I'd always be proud of him. William examined the photograph, seeing in the young teacher's face the same kindness and strength that Margaret still carried, even in her grief. He was right to keep it. You can see the love in your eyes, even in this old photograph. He was going to be a teacher too, Margaret continued. Said he wanted to inspire children the way I had inspired him. He just finished his training program last month. Her voice trailed off as she contemplated all the children who would never benefit from James's teaching, all the lives he would never touch. Across the room, Kate was learning about Emma's elaborate plans for her horse rescue operation. The little girl had apparently conducted extensive research, creating detailed lists of horse breeds, drawing floor plans for stables, and calculating costs with a serious dedication of a seasoned business planner. She had a jar where she saved money for the horses, Sarah explained, pulling out her phone to show pictures. Every coin she found, every bit of allowance, everything went into that jar. She was up to almost 30 pounds and was so proud of it. Kate looked at the photos on Sarah's phone. Emma grinning beside a large glass jar filled with coins, Emma at a local fair petting horses, Emma wearing oversized riding boots that she'd convinced her parents to buy for practice. Each image captured a vibrant child full of determination and dreams. What happened to the jar? Kate asked gently. It's still in her room, Sarah replied. I can't bring myself to move it. Sometimes I add coins to it when I find them, just because I know it doesn't make sense, but it feels like keeping her dream alive somehow. It makes perfect sense, Kate assured her. Dreams don't die just because dreamers do. Maybe someday that jar can help start a horse rescue program in Emma's name. The suggestion hung in the air, not as a solution to grief, but as a possibility for meaning, a way to channel love and loss into something constructive and lasting. The time in the community center stretched longer than planned, but no one minded. Healing couldn't be scheduled, and genuine connection couldn't be rushed. William and Kate moved from family to family, listening to stories, offering comfort, and simply bearing witness to the depth of love that surrounded each person who had been lost. Eventually, though, it became necessary to move to the public memorial site. The families understood, and many chose to accompany William and Kate to the main gathering area where hundreds of community members were waiting. The transition from private grief to public mourning was difficult but necessary. Other people needed to be acknowledged too, and their sorrow deserved recognition. The main memorial had grown even larger during their time inside the community center. Flowers now covered nearly every available surface, creating a colorful tapestry of love and remembrance. Handwritten cards fluttered in the gentle breeze, messages from strangers who felt compelled to express their sympathy and solidarity. Children's drawings were taped to trees, depicting angels, hearts, and rainbows, their innocent attempts to make sense of senseless tragedy. As William and Kate approached the memorial, the crowd parted respectfully to give them access while maintaining their own connection to the space. These were not spectators, but participants in collective grieving, each person processing their own relationship to the tragedy and their own need to show care. A young woman approached Kate hesitantly, holding a small child who couldn't have been more than 3 years old. "Your Highness," she began nervously, "I'm sorry to bother you, but my daughter keeps asking about all the flowers. She doesn't understand why everyone is sad, but she wanted to add her own flower to the pile. Would that be okay?" Kate knelt down to the child's level, smiling gently at the little girl who clutched a single dandelion in her small fist. "That's a beautiful flower," Kate said softly. "Would you like to place it with all the others?" The child nodded solemnly and toddled toward the memorial, carefully placing her dandelion among the elaborate arrangements. It was such a small gesture, but it represented something profound about human nature, the instinct to contribute to healing, to participate in community care, to offer whatever we have even when what we have seems insignificant. William was approached by a group of teenagers, some of whom had known the victims personally. They stood together awkwardly, trying to balance their natural teenage energy with the gravity of the situation. Their youth made the tragedy even more poignant. They were at an age where the world should feel full of possibilities, not shadowed by senseless loss. "Were you friends with some of the people who died?" William asked gently, recognizing their particular type of confusion and pain. One boy, probably about 16, nodded. "James was teaching at our school for his training. He was cool, you know. He actually listened to us, didn't just talk at us like most adults. And Emma was my neighbor. I used to see her practicing with her toy horses in the backyard." "It's hard to lose people when you're your age," William acknowledged. "You're supposed to be thinking about your future, not about death and loss." "It's not fair." "That's just it," another teenager chimed in. "Everyone keeps saying it's not fair, but that doesn't really help, does it? Fair or not fair, it still happened. They're still gone." William nodded, appreciating the young person's directness. "You're absolutely right. Saying it's not fair doesn't change anything. But maybe acknowledging that it's not fair is the first step toward figuring out how to live with something that makes no sense." The teenagers seemed to appreciate his honesty. In a world where adults often tried to provide explanations or comfort that fell hollow, his admission that some things simply couldn't be made to make sense was refreshing. Kate rejoined William after speaking with several families, and together they began to walk slowly through different sections of the memorial. Each area seemed to have developed its own character. One section filled with children's tributes, another focused on formal flowers from organizations, a corner where people had left personal items and written memories. In the personal memories section, they found letters tucked into plastic bags to protect them from weather, photographs laminated to preserve them, small objects that held significance only to the people who had left them. A pair of reading glasses sat beside a note explaining that they had belonged to someone's father. A toy car was accompanied by a card from a little boy who wanted to share his favorite thing with a friend who could no longer play. "Look at this," Kate whispered, pointing to a section where people had tied ribbons to a fence. Each ribbon had a name written on it, not just the names of victims, but the names of survivors, family members, friends, and even strangers who had been affected by the tragedy. The fence had become a web of connection, a visual representation of how far the ripples of grief and care could spread. They spent nearly an hour moving through the memorial, taking time to read messages, examine tributes, and speak with anyone who approached them. Some conversations were brief, just a handshake and a few words of mutual acknowledgement. Others lasted longer, diving into stories and memories that people needed to share with someone who would listen with respect and attention. One conversation particularly struck William. An elderly man approached him carrying a small potted plant instead of cut flowers. When William asked about his choice, the man explained that he wanted to leave something that would continue growing, that would outlast the temporary memorial and serve as a living reminder. Death is permanent, the man said simply, but life continues. I thought it was important to leave something that represents that continuing life. The symbolism was powerful and appropriate. While cut flowers would eventually wilt and be cleared away, the living plant would continue to grow and change, adapting to seasons, requiring care, representing the ongoing process of healing and remembrance. As the afternoon progressed, William and Kate began to understand that their visit was serving multiple purposes. For some people, it provided validation. Their grief mattered enough to draw the attention of the future king and queen. For others, it offered a sense of national unity in the face of tragedy. But, perhaps most importantly, it created a focal point for community healing, a shared experience that helped people process their individual and collective trauma. The media presence, while respectfully managed, was also serving a purpose. Images of the royal couple listening to families, examining tributes, and participating in community mourning would be seen across the country and around the world. These images would communicate that grief could be dignified, that public mourning could be meaningful, and that leadership sometimes meant simply showing up and bearing witness. As the day began to wind down, William and Kate found themselves back with some of the families they had met at the community center. The public setting had been important, but these quieter, more personal interactions felt like the heart of their visit. Sarah, Emma's mother, approached Kate one more time before they left. "Thank you," she said simply. "Not just for coming, but for listening, for caring about who Emma was, not just what happened to her." It was a crucial distinction. So much media coverage and public discussion focused on the tragedy itself, on the details of what had occurred and who was responsible. But for the families, the most important thing was remembering and honoring the lives that had been lived, the personalities that had been lost, the specific individual qualities that made each victim irreplaceable. "Emma sounds like she was an extraordinary little girl," Kate replied. "Her dreams were beautiful, and they say so much about her generous heart. She wanted to rescue horses who needed help. That tells me everything I need to know about the kind of person she was." As their car pulled away from the community, both William and Kate sat in contemplative silence. The day had been emotionally exhausting, but deeply meaningful. They had witnessed the worst and best of human experience, senseless tragedy and profound love, devastating loss, and remarkable resilience. The evening news would report on their visit, describing their words and actions, analyzing the significance of their presence. But the real impact of the day couldn't be captured in news reports or official statements. It lived in the private moments of connection, the individual stories shared, the small gestures of comfort and care that reminded everyone present of their shared humanity. That night, as they tucked their own children into bed, both William and Kate held them a little tighter, kissed them a little longer, and felt a deeper appreciation for the fragile preciousness of ordinary family life. The day had reminded them that tragedy could strike anywhere, anytime, without warning or reason. But it had also shown them that love persists even in the face of devastating loss, and that communities can find ways to heal together even when healing seems impossible. The weeks following their visit felt different for both William and Kate. The experience had changed something fundamental in their understanding of their roles, not just as members of the royal family, but as human beings connected to a larger community of people navigating life's unpredictable challenges. The faces they had met, the stories they had heard, the raw emotion they had witnessed, none of it could simply be filed away as another completed royal duty. Kate found herself thinking about Sarah and little Emma at unexpected moments. While reviewing invitations at her desk, she would suddenly remember Emma's detailed plans for the horse rescue farm. During her own children's bedtime stories, she thought about all the bedtime stories that would never again be read in Emma's room. The grief wasn't hers to claim, but the memory of witnessing such profound loss had become part of her own experience, shaping how she moved through her daily life. William experienced something similar. David's struggle with sudden single parenthood resonated deeply, making him more conscious of his own partnership with Kate, more grateful for their shared responsibility in raising their children. He found himself paying closer attention to the small moments of family life that could so easily be taken for granted. Saturday morning breakfasts, homework help sessions, the comfortable routine of tucking children into bed. Their staff noticed a change too. Both William and Kate seemed more present in their interactions, more focused on the human element of their royal engagements. Previous visits to charities and community organizations had always been conducted with appropriate care and attention, but now there was an added depth of understanding about what it meant to bear witness to people's experiences. The letters began arriving within days of their visit. Handwritten notes on various types of paper, from elegant stationery to notebook pages torn from school journals. Some came from the families they had met directly, but many more came from people who had watched news coverage of their visit or heard about it from friends and neighbors. The letters weren't requesting anything or asking for responses. They were simply expressions of gratitude for showing up, for caring, for treating a community's grief with respect and dignity. Margaret, James's grandmother, sent a particularly moving letter along with copies of some of her grandson's lesson plans from his teaching program. She had thought William might like to see what James had been preparing to teach, the way he had planned to inspire young minds, just as she had done for decades before him. The lesson plans revealed a creative, thoughtful young man who had been developing innovative ways to help children learn about history and literature. Reading them gave William a fuller picture of a life that had been cut short, beyond just the tragic circumstances of James's death. Sarah sent photographs, not just of Emma, but of the horse rescue jar that Kate had asked about. She had decided to start taking pictures of it each month, documenting how it continued to grow as family members and friends added coins in Emma's memory. What had started as one little girl's ambitious dream was becoming a community project, a tangible way for people to honor Emma's generous spirit while working towards something positive. These personal connections continued to deepen over the following months. Kate began corresponding regularly with several of the families, not in any official capacity, but as one mother reaching out to other parents who were navigating impossible circumstances. She shared resources for grief counseling, connected families with organizations that could provide support, and sometimes simply sent notes acknowledging difficult dates like birthdays and anniversaries. William found himself thinking differently about his future role as king. The traditional aspects of monarchy, the ceremonies, the constitutional responsibilities, the formal duties, remained important, but his perspective on what it meant to serve had expanded. He began to understand that some of the most meaningful work happened in quiet moments of human connection, in a willingness to step into spaces of grief and uncertainty without trying to fix everything. Their children, despite their young ages, seemed to absorb some of the lessons from their parents' experience. George began asking more questions about why people sometimes needed help and how families could support each other during difficult times. Charlotte started drawing pictures to send to children whose families were going through hard times, inspired by hearing about Emma's love of drawing. Even Louis, too young to fully understand the situation, seemed to pick up on his parents' increased attention to kindness and gratitude. The national conversation around the tragedy continued to evolve as well. Initial focus on investigation and blame gradually shifted toward discussions of community healing and prevention. Support organizations reported increased donations and volunteer interest. Schools began implementing new programs focused on emotional resilience and community connection. The tragedy had sparked a broader reflection on how society could better support each other through difficult times. 6 months after their initial visit, William and Kate returned to the community for the unveiling of a permanent memorial. The temporary flowers and cards had long since been cleared away, but they had been replaced by something more lasting, a beautiful garden designed with input from the families and community members. Emma's horse rescue jar had indeed grown into a real project, with enough funds raised to sponsor rescue horses at a nearby sanctuary. A plaque in the garden honored James's commitment to education by establishing a scholarship fund for young people pursuing teaching careers. The return visit felt different from their first one. The immediate shock and disbelief had faded, replaced by a quieter but no less profound sense of loss mixed with determination to move forward meaningfully. The families looked tired but stronger, aged by their experiences but also deepened by them. They had learned to carry their grief in ways that honored their loved ones while still allowing space for hope and connection. Sarah approached Kate during the memorial service, and they embraced like old friends. "The jar reached 1,000 pounds last month," Sarah told her. Emma would have been so proud. She always was proud when her saving jar grew, even when it was just a few pence. She would have been amazed, Kate agreed. Her dream inspired so many people. That's the kind of legacy that really matters. David was there with his children, who had grown visibly in the months since the tragedy. The family still carried their loss, but they had found ways to continue building life around the absence of their wife and mother. David had joined a support group for single parents and had become an advocate for better grief counseling resources in schools. His children were thriving as much as could be expected, supported by extended family, friends, and a community that had rallied around them. "We're different," David told William. "We'll always be different, but we're still a family, just a different shape of family than we were before." William nodded, understanding the distinction. The goal had never been to return to how things were before. That was impossible. The goal was to find ways to move forward that honored the past while still embracing the future. Margaret had become something of a community elder in the months following James's death. She had organized storytelling sessions where older community members shared memories and wisdom with younger generations, explicitly inspired by her grandson's commitment to education and connection across age groups. Her grief remained deep, but it had found expression in service to others, in keeping James's values alive through action. The memorial garden itself was a testament to collaborative healing. Instead of a traditional monument focused on death and loss, the community had chosen to create something living and beautiful that would require ongoing care and attention. There were sections for quiet reflection, areas designed for children to play, and spaces that could accommodate community gatherings throughout the year. It was simultaneously a place of mourning and a place of life, acknowledging that both grief and joy were part of the human experience. During the memorial service, several family members spoke about their loved ones, sharing memories and reflections that painted complete pictures of lives fully lived despite being cut short. The focus was not on the tragedy itself, but on the specific qualities and contributions of each person who had been lost. Emma's artistic spirit, James's dedication to education, and the unique characteristics of each victim were celebrated and remembered. Kate was particularly moved by a letter that was read from Emma's classmates. They had started a tradition of drawing pictures of horses in memory of their friend, and several children had become interested in real horses as a result. Their teacher reported that the class had raised money for riding lessons for children with disabilities, inspired by Emma's dream of helping horses and people who needed extra care. These ripple effects of positive action stemming from tragedy demonstrated something important about human resilience and the power of choosing meaning over despair. The families hadn't simply survived their losses. They had found ways to transform their grief into forces for good in their community and beyond. As the memorial service concluded, William addressed the gathered crowd. He spoke not as a prince delivering prepared remarks, but as someone who had been personally moved by the community's strength and grace in the face of unimaginable challenge. 6 months ago, "We came here to offer whatever comfort we could," he said, "but we received far more than we gave. You showed us what it means to honor love through action, to carry grief with dignity, and to choose hope even when hope seems impossible." The memorial garden we're dedicating today isn't just about remembering what was lost. It's about nurturing what continues to grow. After the formal ceremony, families gathered in smaller groups around different sections of the memorial garden. Some stood quietly together, lost in private memories. Others shared stories and laughter, celebrating lives well lived. Children who had been too young to attend the original memorial service played carefully among the flowers, their presence adding life and movement to the peaceful space. Kate found herself sitting on a bench with several mothers from the community, some who had lost children and others who were simply part of the support network that had formed in response to the tragedy. They talked about the challenges of explaining loss to young children, about the ways grief changed over time, about the unexpected moments when sadness would surface weeks or months later. "I used to think grief had stages," said one mother. "You know, like the books describe. But it's not really like that. It's more like weather. Sometimes it's stormy, sometimes it's calm, sometimes you get unexpected downpours, but you learn to live with whatever weather comes." The metaphor resonated with all of them. Grief wasn't something to be solved or completed. It was something to be lived with, adapted to, integrated into the ongoing experience of life. The families who were healing most successfully weren't the ones who had gotten over their losses, but the ones who had found ways to carry their love and their grief together, allowing both to coexist in their daily experiences. William spent time talking with community leaders about the long-term support systems that had been established following the tragedy. Mental health resources had been expanded, community connection programs have been strengthened, and new protocols have been developed for responding to future crises. The tragedy had revealed both vulnerabilities and strengths in the community support systems, leading to improvements that would benefit everyone, not just those directly affected by this particular event. The afternoon stretched into evening, with many people reluctant to leave the memorial garden. There was something healing about being together in this space that acknowledged both loss and continuing life. Children played while adults talked, teenagers helped elderly community members navigate the garden paths, and people from different backgrounds found common ground in their shared experiences of caring for each other. As William and Kate prepared to leave, they were approached by a young girl who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. She handed Kate a small drawing, a horse running free in a field, with "For Emma's horses" written in careful childish handwriting at the bottom. "I didn't know Emma," the little girl explained solemnly, "but I heard about her horse dream. I wanted to help somehow." The drawing captured something essential about the community's response to tragedy, the way love and care could spread beyond direct personal connections, the way one child's dream could inspire action in another child who had never met her, the way healing could become a collective effort that included everyone who was willing to participate. That evening, as William and Kate drove back to London, they carried with them a deeper understanding of their roles and responsibilities. The day had demonstrated that effective leadership sometimes meant stepping back and allowing communities to show their own strength, providing support and acknowledgement rather than trying to direct or control the healing process. The letters and updates from families continued to arrive in the months that followed. Each one offered a window into ongoing processes of grief and recovery, showing how people found individual and collective ways to build meaningful lives in the aftermath of tragedy. Some families thrived, finding new purpose and deeper connections through their experiences. Others struggled more, cycling through periods of progress and setback as they navigated their particular challenges. Kate began to recognize patterns in the letters that suggested which factors were most helpful for healing. Families who had strong community support networks seemed to fare better than those who were more isolated. People who found ways to honor their loved ones through positive action often reported feeling more at peace than those who remained focused primarily on their loss. Children who were given age-appropriate ways to understand and process what had happened generally adapted better than those who were simply told they were too young to understand. These observations began to influence how William and Kate approached other similar situations. They started requesting more detailed information about community support systems before visiting areas affected by tragedy. They began asking more specific questions about ongoing needs rather than just immediate response. They developed better skills for identifying and amplifying the healing work that communities were already doing rather than imposing outside solutions. The experience had taught them that their most valuable contribution was often simply bearing witness with respect and care, acknowledging suffering without trying to minimize it, and celebrating resilience without demanding it. They learned to follow the lead of the people they were trying to support rather than assuming they knew what kinds of comfort or assistance would be most helpful. 2 years had passed since that first devastating day when William and Kate stepped into a community forever changed by tragedy. The memorial garden had matured, with flowers blooming in cycles that marked the seasons and the passage of time. Emma's Horse Rescue Fund had grown beyond anything her young imagination could have conceived, supporting not just rescued horses, but educational programs that taught children about animal care and compassion. James's teaching scholarship had enabled 3 young educators to complete their training programs, carrying forward his commitment to inspiring young minds. The community itself had developed a different character, not better or worse than before, but deeper, more intentionally connected. People checked on their neighbors more regularly. Schools had implemented programs that taught children how to support friends through difficult times. Local businesses had established networks for providing assistance during family crises. The tragedy had revealed both the fragility of ordinary life and the remarkable strength that could emerge when people chose to face that fragility together. For William and Kate, the experience had become a touchstone that influenced how they approached every aspect of their public and private lives. They had learned that authentic leadership often meant accepting uncertainty, that comfort sometimes came through presence rather than words, and that healing was a community process that couldn't be rushed or managed from the outside. Their own children had absorbed these lessons in ways both subtle and profound. George, now older and more aware of the world's complexities, had developed an unusual maturity about loss and resilience. He understood that sad things happen sometimes, but that people could help each other through difficult times. Charlotte had maintained her artistic interests, but now often created drawings specifically to give to people who might need encouragement. Louis, though still very young, had learned to be gentle with others and to notice when someone seemed sad or worried. The correspondence with families from the affected community had evolved into genuine friendships that transcended the original circumstances. Sarah had become someone Kate turned to for perspective on parenting challenges, finding wisdom in how a mother who had experienced the worst possible loss still managed to navigate daily life with grace and purpose. David had started a support group for single parents that had grown into a national organization, and William occasionally consulted with him about policies related to family support during crisis situations. Margaret had become something of a national figure in education advocacy, using her platform as James's grandmother to promote programs that connected retired teachers with young people entering the profession. Her grief had transformed into a mission to honor her grandson's educational values, and she had discovered unexpected energy and purpose in her advocacy work. But perhaps the most significant change was in how William and Kate understood their future roles. The traditional aspects of monarchy remained important: the constitutional responsibilities, the ceremonial duties, the representation of national values, and continuity. However, their vision of leadership had expanded to embrace what they had learned about the power of authentic human connection during times of crisis. They began to speak more openly in their public appearances about the importance of mental health support, community resilience, and the value of acknowledging grief rather than rushing past it toward false optimism. Their speeches started including references to the lessons they had learned from families who had faced unimaginable loss with courage and grace. They credited communities with teaching them about strength rather than positioning themselves as sources of wisdom for others. The approach resonated with a public that was hungry for authenticity from their leaders. People responded positively to royalty that acknowledged vulnerability and uncertainty rather than projecting invulnerability. The willingness to admit that some questions had no easy answers, that some pain couldn't be quickly fixed, paradoxically seemed to offer more genuine comfort than traditional reassurances. Other royal family members noticed the evolution in William and Kate's approach to their duties. King Charles observed that his son and daughter-in-law brought a different quality of presence to their engagements, a depth of listening and responsiveness that enhanced their effectiveness as representatives of the crown. They had learned to balance maintaining appropriate dignity with being genuinely accessible to people in crisis. The anniversary of the tragedy became an annual pilgrimage for William and Kate, but not in any formal or publicized way. They would quietly visit the memorial garden each year, spending time with families who wanted to see them and participating in whatever commemoration activities the community had planned. These visits were not announced in advance and were not covered by media. They were simply part of the ongoing relationship that had developed between the royal couple and a community that had welcomed them into their most vulnerable moments. During one such visit, Kate sat with Sarah in the section of the garden dedicated to children. Emma would have been 10 years old, likely still passionate about horses, and probably developing new interests as well. The absence remained profound, but it no longer dominated every moment of Sarah's existence. "I've been thinking about time lately," Sarah told Kate, as they watched other children play among the flowers. "How Emma's time was short, but somehow complete. She had her jar, her dreams, her drawings, her plans. She lived fully in the time she had, and now her dreams are living beyond her time. Maybe that's what matters most. Not how much time we get, but how completely we live in whatever time we have." Kate nodded, understanding that Sarah had arrived at a kind of wisdom that could only come through the deep work of grieving and healing. She's still teaching people about generosity and hope through everything that's grown from her horse fund. Her time continues to create more time for others to learn and care. These conversations had taught Kate and William that supporting people through tragedy wasn't about helping them get back to normal, but about helping them discover new forms of meaning and connection that could coexist with permanent loss. The goal wasn't to eliminate grief, but to help it find expression in ways that honored both the pain of loss and the ongoing possibility of love and service. Their understanding of this balance influenced how they approached other families facing crisis situations. When they visited communities affected by natural disasters, economic hardship, or other forms of collective challenge, they came with questions rather than answers, with curiosity about local strengths rather than assumptions about outside solutions needed. They had learned to recognize the signs of resilient communities, the informal networks of support, the creative ways people adapted to change circumstances, the stories they told about their own capacity to endure and overcome difficulties. Instead of imposing external frameworks for recovery, they focused on amplifying and supporting the healing work that was already happening organically. William found that this approach served him well in his broader royal duties as well. When meeting with government officials about policy issues, he brought perspectives shaped by direct conversation with people affected by those policies. When participating in international diplomacy, he drew on his understanding of how communities heal from trauma to inform discussions about post-conflict recovery and reconciliation. Kate discovered that her experiences with grieving families had prepared her for supporting women and families facing various challenges. Her work with maternal mental health organizations became more nuanced and effective as she learned to recognize the difference between offering solutions and offering accompaniment through difficult processes. Both of them began to speak more openly about the evolution in their own understanding of leadership and service. In interviews and speeches, they acknowledged that their most important learning had come from people they were supposed to be helping, that communities in crisis had taught them lessons about resilience that no formal training could have provided. This honesty about their own learning process seemed to encourage others to acknowledge their own uncertainties and growth. People began sharing stories about times when they had been changed by experiences of helping others, when they had discovered strength they didn't know they possessed, when they had found meaning in the midst of circumstances they never would have chosen. The ripple effects of the original tragedy continued to spread in unexpected directions. Emma's Horse Rescue Fund had inspired similar programs in other communities. James's teaching scholarship had led to mentorship programs connecting veteran educators with newcomers to the profession. The memorial garden design had been adapted for other communities, creating spaces for healing and reflection. But, perhaps more significantly, the way the community had chosen to process their grief collectively had become a model for other groups facing crisis situations. The emphasis on storytelling, on honoring individual lives rather than just mourning collective loss, on finding ways for grief to fuel positive action rather than destructive anger. These approaches have been noticed and adapted by communities dealing with their own tragedies. William and Kate often received letters from people they had never met, describing how hearing about their visit to the memorial community had influenced their own approaches to supporting friends or family members through difficult times. Teachers wrote about classroom discussions inspired by Emma's story. Parents described conversations with their children about loss and resilience that had been prompted by news coverage of the memorial garden dedication. The impact extended internationally as well. Other royal families and political leaders had taken note of William and Kate's approach to crisis response, particularly their emphasis on long-term relationship building rather than brief symbolic gestures. The model of sustained, authentic engagement with communities in crisis was being discussed in leadership training programs and diplomatic institutions. On the second anniversary of the tragedy, the community organized a celebration of life rather than a memorial service. Families shared updates about positive developments in their lives. Children performed songs and dances. Local businesses donated food for a community picnic in the memorial garden. The focus was on acknowledging growth and connection that had emerged from loss rather than dwelling exclusively on what had been taken away. William and Kate participated in the celebration as community members rather than as visiting dignitaries. They helped serve food, played games with children, listened to updates from families they had come to care about, and participated in group activities just like everyone else. The informality felt appropriate and meaningful. These were relationships that had grown beyond protocol into something more personal and enduring. During the picnic, Kate found herself in conversation with a group of teenagers who had been children when the tragedy occurred. They had grown up with a memorial garden as part of their neighborhood landscape, with annual celebrations and ongoing community support programs as normal parts of their experience. For them, the tragedy was part of their community's history, but so was the remarkable response to it. "We learned that bad things can happen," one teenager explained when Kate asked about their perspectives, "but we also learned that people take care of each other when bad things happen. Like the tragedy was terrible, but the way everyone came together was beautiful." Both things are true at the same time. The young person's matter-of-fact acceptance of complexity impressed Kate. These children had grown up understanding that life contained both devastating loss and profound love, that communities could be simultaneously vulnerable and strong, that healing was possible without forgetting or minimizing pain. As the celebration continued into the evening, William reflected on how much his own understanding of leadership and service had been shaped by this community's example. They had shown him that strength wasn't about having all the answers or being able to fix everything, but about being willing to show up consistently, to listen carefully, and to support whatever healing processes emerged naturally from people's own wisdom and care for each other. The lessons had applications far beyond crisis response. In his role as future king, William would face countless situations requiring leadership in the midst of uncertainty. The community had taught him to trust in people's capacity for resilience, to look for existing strengths rather than focusing primarily on problems, and to understand his role as supportive rather than directive. Kate had learned similar lessons about the power of authentic presence over expert solutions. In her work with various charitable organizations, she now approached her role more as a learner and amplifier than as a source of answers. She had discovered that the most helpful thing she could often do was simply bear witness to people's experiences and help ensure their voices were heard by others who could provide support. As they prepared to leave the celebration that evening, William and Kate were approached by a delegation of community children who had prepared a special presentation. They had created a scrapbook documenting the growth and changes in their community over the past 2 years with photographs, drawings, and written reflections about what they had learned about caring for each other. The final page of the scrapbook contained a group letter addressed to William and Kate, thanking them not just for their initial visit during the crisis, but for continuing to be part of the community's ongoing story of healing and growth. The letter expressed appreciation for their willingness to learn from the community rather than just offering help to it. "You could have just visited once and then gone away," the letter read, "but instead you became our friends. You let us teach you things, and that made us feel important and strong. Thank you for seeing good things in us, even when we were very sad." The simple eloquence of the children's words captured something essential about what had made the relationship between the royal couple and the community so meaningful. It had been reciprocal from the beginning, with learning and growth flowing in all directions rather than just charity flowing from those with resources to those in need. Driving back to London that evening, William and Kate carried with them not just memories of a lovely community celebration, but a renewed understanding of their capacity to be changed by the people they encountered in their royal duties. The community had given them gifts that would influence every aspect of their future service: patience with uncertainty, faith in human resilience, and appreciation for the healing power of sustained, authentic relationship. The tragedy that had first brought them to the community remained a source of sadness that would never completely fade. But it had also become the foundation for ongoing connections, continuing growth, and deepening understanding of what it meant to serve others with genuine care and respect. In learning to accompany a community through its darkest time, William and Kate had discovered forms of leadership that would serve them well in whatever challenges lay ahead.